Hi there, my name's Ed. Today we're going to talk about how to best study as a student. Now, it's in my opinion that most students actually don't know the best methods for studying for exams and their courses that they're doing. And more needs to be done to improve awareness for the best techniques for learning. So the most important thing you need to think about as a student when studying is to use active learning techniques. So what I want you to do is really rethink the relationship that you have with the content that you're provided that you need to learn. What your job as a student should be is not just to try and absorb this information passively, but actually take the resources that you have and create your own active learning tools with all the resources that you've already been provided. At university level, nowadays, you're often provided with slide decks and ample lecture material, and you also have textbooks. You've got many sources of information. It shouldn't be your job to just reorder this information in a passive way, such as rewriting the contents of a lecture. What you can do, which is really beneficial, is to create tools for active learning, which you can then use later on to improve your engagement with the topic. So firstly, just to start off and say, well, why am I telling you this? Well, one thing I've already said is that students don't actually know these techniques still, even though they've been talked about for several years on social media and other places. But it's also because it worked for me. I employ these techniques over from the start of my degree, when at the start I had no idea how to study, and I just studiously wrote down all the content of a lecture and wasted a lot of time doing that, and found when I went back to those resources that I had created myself, they were totally useless for learning. They were no better than the original lecture that I watched. And I'd spent a long time making those resources, so it was a big waste of time for not much benefit. And it worked for me. I achieved relatively high exam averages in my course. So I know these techniques at least worked for me, so I'll tell you about them as well. Some other resources which I'd recommend looking at. So most of this information actually comes from the legendary Ali Abdaal, who has posted loads and loads of videos on studying techniques. So most of what you see here is just going to be similar to what he suggests, but this is just what I've done from his advice. Another really good resource is Dr. Barbara Oakley. She has an online course about how to learn, and also has written a book and is constantly providing different ideas in this space. So if you want more information, you can consult her work. So the main tool that I utilized in my courses was using Notion. So Notion is a software. It's kind of just like a note-taking software, essentially. It's got loads of inbuilt functionality, which some people use. I just kind of just skimmed the surface of Notion, really. But the main tool that they have in there is a toggle tool. And the reason this is important is because essentially you can hide information underneath a toggle. So you can write a question and you can hide the answer for yourself later. And this is just a really simple way of producing an active learning tool. So rather than having a statement of fact, like the sky is blue, for example, you'd write yourself a question, what color is the sky? And then underneath the toggle, you could put blue. And that would actually just totally reframe and change the way that you engage with that information, which can be really powerful. So I might look and have a look at my Notion and see what we can see in my original university notes.
I'd like to just show you the layout that I used for creating notes within Notion. So when you download Notion, you'll see some features that look like this. You can create pages on the side, which act kind of like little databases. And then you have various different features here. So you can create tables with different columns. You can see I didn't really use the columns. I mostly just use these for storing the pages. So within a page, you can put another page. So here I have the topic of NMR. And within that topic, I created a set of different toggle pages here. So within each of these, I have these different toggles, which will have my kind of question and answers inside. So another really nice thing to do is to color code. So what I'd like to do is have a certain color for something that's really important, which anytime I open this page, I want to look at this and be able to use that information. And other times I'd color things in either red or orange to show how difficult I was finding it. So if it's orange, that means that I didn't manage to actually kind of answer my mini question. So for example, here I wasn't able to roughly explain how you measured relaxation time in NMR. So I found that to be really useful, and it gives you some kind of structure as well every time you open each of these pages.
A second tool which I used a bit more sparingly, but is also really important as well, is the well-known flashcard software called Anki. Anki is really good for, I would say, this kind of like really repeated drilling of information, more towards a kind of memorization. So some people in the kind of academic education space don't like the idea of memorization, and I've heard people talk negatively about this idea of memorization. But fundamentally, there's many parts of your student life where you will need to memorize things. And yes, you could learn how to derive an equation from first principles every single time. But that's really hard, and that sort of thinking won people Nobel Prizes. So I think it's often easier just to memorize these things first. And then once you've memorized them, you then have them at hand. And then afterwards you can play around with them, the ideas, and you can learn new relationships, and you can learn how to derive them. But fundamentally, if you need to know an equation, you just need to know it. And that's where Anki is really, really powerful. So with Anki, you can create your own flashcards. And one thing that you want to think about with Anki is that you don't want to be spending loads of time making flashcards, and you don't want to make lots of flashcards either. You don't want to make yourself 100 flashcards, which takes you like ages to go through. And then, once you do them, it puts them into a spaced schedule. So once you make 100, like you've got this endless, basically like task of going through them. I'd really limit the flashcards that you decide to make. For those ones that you make, you can do through what's called image occlusion. So sometimes it's easier just to write out a flashcard if it's just a simple sort of statement of fact. Like maybe, if you really need to remember that the sky is blue, for example. But another really quick way of making flashcards is to screenshot something from your lecture slides. So maybe it's an equation, maybe it's a fundamental law that you need to know. And for example, like the second law of thermodynamics or something random like that. You can just screenshot the slide from your lecture notes, which states the second law, and you can block out what the law is. So you now have a flashcard which will say second law of thermodynamics, and you look at it and you go, oh, what's the second law of thermodynamics? And once it's in there, you might not know the first time you look at the answer. The second time you might know it a little bit, and you can integrate that into your flow, into your studying. So, in summary, I'd use Anki sparingly for more memorization focused content. So there are other techniques that you can use to really help integrate what you've learned from your lectures, from your Notion, from your active recall tools. The reason why these are important is because Notion and Anki basically give you a way of learning kind of fragmented bits of knowledge. So you might have some level of inter sort of connectedness between these like different concepts, but they are just individual ideas, different concepts, equations, whatever it might be. So you want to give your brain an opportunity to try and interrelate these and link them together, and also to see how they piece together essentially. So there's different ways these techniques can be used. So generally, the technique is around taking a piece of paper and trying to write down what you know about a topic, and the kind of seriousness and the extent to which you do this can be different. So it might just be a really quick 5 or 10 minutes. Try and write down everything that you know. Can you write down the key concepts, the key fundamental laws? Can you write down the equations? Can you write down any examples? And that's just a check of knowledge, and it really helps stimulate that kind of active learning pathway. Another style of writing technique would be a more complete and kind of integrated activity where you might try and write down, all the different concepts in a topic and all of the related information. And then you're trying to just exhaustively do this. So you're trying to write down everything that you need to know. And then at a point you'll get stuck, obviously. You won't know everything. You might know 40%, you might know, 70%, doesn't matter. And once you get to that point of not knowing anything else, you then can look at your notes and look at your resources that you have, look at your lectures, and you can look at those. You can rekindle everything that you knew and didn't know, and then you can go back to your piece of paper, maybe like a mind map, for example, and you can then fill in the blanks essentially. And this is a really good opportunity because this gives you an opportunity to see how different concepts relate to each other. It gives you a chance to see where you're weakest, where you're strongest. And this is a really, really important thing to be able to do. If you know where you're weakest, you can focus your energy towards those areas. And that really, as a learner, is what you're spending most of your time doing, is actually finding what are the things that you don't know. Two final things I would say about studying. One is, how should you organize your time, and what sort of study sessions should you be doing? So for me personally, I'd seen a lot of people recommending the Pomodoro technique, and I used that a lot in first year. But what I found is actually, I think a mixture of Pomodoro and also longer sessions are really useful. The reason for this is that the Pomodoro technique is really good for times when you're probably lacking motivation a bit, or when you're doing something that's quite demanding. So doing the Notion toggles is actually quite demanding and quite difficult. And even doing like 15, 20 minutes, half an hour of Notion questions, it's like constant onslaught on your brain, which is really good. It's really good for learning. But I think this is a perfect thing to do through Pomodoro. So set 25-minute or half an hour timers and give yourself that break. So that's really powerful. But again, this is not the end of the story, right? So you need to also give your brain the opportunity to have longer, focused, deeper sessions that are integrating, that are working on these problems, and not just focusing on like just one, single, going from one fact to the next. So, set longer timers. So an hour and a half timer is a good time to be focusing on something that's more difficult, or whether you're doing a past paper, whether you're doing a workshop, whether you're doing one of these mind maps that connects different topics together. Set aside that 90-minute time slot and really focus on what you're doing, and that will be really, really amazing for your learning as well. So I think for me personally, you need to be sensible. You need to manage your motivation, because just trying to do like 6 hours of Notion is impossible. You'll never be able to do it. So you've got to manage your expectations essentially, and work with yourself, and be kind to yourself. One thing which I'm also a believer in, which some people didn't really get, or like didn't really even believe, is that I don't think you should be studying for like more than 6 hours a day. I mean, the actual time is arbitrary, but you don't need to be studying for a long time each day. For me personally, when I was studying the most, I was probably doing like 4 hours of really good studying, sometimes more. And it depends what style of studying you're doing, but 4 hours of really focused, productive studying is loads, and that will be great for retention, for the future, and it'll be great for your exams. As long as you're not cramming, and as long as you haven't left it until like 2 days before or whatever, then in some ways it's all about it's quality, not quantity. So don't feel like you need to get to some arbitrary number of hours studied per day. And it's kind of just a competition against yourself, I suppose, in some ways. But do just be focusing on quality, not quantity. Otherwise, again, you'll probably just be spending time doing inefficient methods, like just rewatching lectures. Another really important thing is to think about the quality of your focus when you're studying. So when you're studying, you've got to be mature about this, guys. Don't have your phone next to you and with notifications on and like checking Instagram every 2 seconds. I would recommend putting your phone into like a well-being mode if you have it, or turning it off. Because annoyingly nowadays, you often need to use your phone to be able to log into your university platforms. But set it to a mode like, after that, set it to airplane mode, whatever it is. And be sensible, be thinking about whether you're actually able to deeply focus on what you're doing without distractions. Because every time you get distracted, your brain is going to essentially be thinking about the thing that you just looked at for maybe like even up to a few minutes into your study session. So the more you can focus on something, the easier it is going to be to learn it and understand it and essentially encode it into your brain to remember it later on. So one thing to bear in mind is that these techniques are going to be more difficult than traditional passive techniques, such as just rereading notes or watching lectures. But that's a good thing. You want it to be more difficult, and if it's more difficult, actually, that's a sign that these techniques are working. And one potential reframing of this is that frustration towards studying is actually a really good signal. And that frustration signal could actually improve your retention of a topic later on. It's essentially a signal to your brain to say, this is really difficult. I want to know what's going on here. And we're going to have to spend extra resources. We're going to have to put down extra connections in the brain to try and understand what's going on here and to be able to remember this for the future. So when you're feeling frustrated, stick with that feeling, kind of push through, because if you just stand up and leave it, I've done that. I've been guilty of that in the past, where something is too annoying and frustrating, difficult, and you haven't set it up in a way that kind of is working for you. That's when you're going to lose everything at that point. So just sit there and just deal with the frustration, essentially. Like, even if you're getting everything wrong, you can just take a step back, and you can rearrange and reorganize the way that you're approaching something. So through all of these techniques, you don't want to make them extremely, extremely difficult for yourself to the point where you're never going to understand and never going to be able to answer a single question that you've given yourself. And you also don't want to make them too easy. So you want to be in a range where you're getting somewhere between, it's probably quite a wide range, really, probably somewhere between 25 to even like 90% of the things correct. And you'll see, obviously there will be a gradient over time. But you've got to be sensible. You've got to make it a bit difficult, but not too difficult. And this, takes some practice, and you'll have to be constantly tweaking your active learning tools to be able to find a level which is good. One thing which is extremely vital when studying at any stage of being a student is the relationship that you have with looking at the notes. So when you're answering questions, when you're attempting workshops, when you're trying to see essentially whether you understand a topic or not, the way that you engage with a topic will be totally different depending on whether you have the notes open in front of you and you're looking at the lecture slides and you're looking at all of the answers, or whether you've put that to one side and you're doing this from the top of your head, from your memory. I can't stress the difference that this makes. And I've seen again and again and again that students will attempt workshops, will attempt questions, will attempt past papers with the notes. And this is the worst thing that you could be doing. You've got to attempt it at least once without the notes. If you don't do that, you're essentially short-circuiting the potential learning that you could be doing from these activities. And at the end of the day, if you're not going to have the notes in the exam, then you should be trying to get to a point where you don't need them for any workshops or past exam papers that you're doing. And this actually brings me on to an important point, which is that learning is actually an extremely emotional game. The reason that you're doing all of these behaviors which are inhibiting your learning is because they feel good. It feels nice to look at the notes while you're attempting a workshop. It feels nice to rewrite your lectures verbatim and make them look really pretty. It feels nice to do these things. And it doesn't feel nice doing active learning techniques where, like, you're getting super frustrated and you just can't remember all the things that you thought you did, and you can't remember any of the equations, you can't remember any of the fundamental laws, even the simple things you're struggling with. That is really frustrating and annoying. And that's, again, it's just an emotional reaction to what's happening. So you have to be extremely mindful of these situations where your emotions might dominate, and that might mean that you're doing something which is less effective and is going to really inhibit your learning. So put away those notes for the first, second, third attempt. You've got to do your best to push through that frustration and just challenge your brain. You've always got to be thinking in terms of this active learning framework, and you'll get better results. Trust me. It's just the way that the brain works, and this is well validated research, which has been shown time and time again to be the case. So overall, I'm telling you the techniques that worked really well for me, and I managed to achieve over 90% average across my exams over 4 years. So these are techniques that worked well throughout my whole degree, and I like to think that I did relatively well in my course. So the most important thing to remember is that active learning is king. And it doesn't matter necessarily what techniques those are, as long as they are active learning. So there might be some techniques in here that you don't like, or that you might prefer to do another way. As long as it's active, as long as you're not watching your lectures over and over again like Netflix, as long as you're not just rewriting what the lecturer says verbatim, then that is a step in the right direction. Right then, I just wanted to say thank you very much for watching. I hope this advice is helpful, and I wish you the best of luck with your learning in the future. Thanks very much. Bye.